Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Hi everyone. My name is Jamie Sears. I am at UBS. I lead our community affairs and corporate responsibility work. I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation today and hear from some incredible leaders for an honest look at racial and social justice, which means I think we're going to get real soon. I wanted just to tell everyone that chat is not accessible, but you can definitely drop questions in the Q&A. And the idea is, I think we'd be able to hear from, and I will kind of initiate the introduction in a moment, but be able to hear from them and then turn to Q&A. And I think these conversations are always great when we can have a lot of dialogue with people who wanted to join for this really important topic. So please, share what's on your mind and feel free to drop that in the Q&A. And before we kick off, I just want to quickly establish a few rules. I want to credit our friends at Furman Consulting. We've done some work with them at UBS, and it's really about creating a brave space for learning and dialogue, and a reminder to model and practice inclusion. So a few of those things that we'll be doing is really staying present and listening to understand, leaning into discomfort, accepting others' reality as true for them. And one of my favorites, remembering that impact matters, not just intent, as we go forward. And I think we'll have this conversation on a few levels: individual, personal, organizational. We're going to hear them talk a little bit about where they work and the work they're doing. And then obviously at the broader societal level. So we'll all be on this learning journey together. And thank you again for being a part of it. So I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to quickly share with you these leaders that we have in the conversation today, and then we'll ask them for an introduction. So we have Dwana Franklin Davis. She's Chief Executive Officer of Reboot Representation. Wini Hebalkar, Senior Vice President Operations SquareTrade, which is an Allstate company. And then Neal, Myrick, Global Head of Tableau Foundation at Tableau. You will be able to access their incredible achievements and all of their incredible bios in the digital guide. But for a conversation like this, we thought we would have them share 3 to 4 identities that are important to them and their place in this world in some way. So you have a little bit of insight into who we'll hear from today. So I'm happy so Wini's at my top left. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jamie. Very nice to meet you all. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So just by way of introduction, of course, you can see my bio in the guide. But the way I think of myself is I am a child of immigrants. I'm married to an immigrant. I'm an Asian American. I'm a proud mother of a middle schooler, and I'm a woman in tech, and in particular fintech. So that's sort of where I come from.
Great. Neal?
Good morning. Happy to be here, everybody. My identities I'm thinking about today, one is I'm a father of an amazing 13-year-old and sometimes smelly boy. And I'm also a husband, and my husband does racial equity work in education and is probably doing that as we speak. And I think about myself as being a team leader and, helping guide my team to do the racial equity work that Tableau Foundation is doing. And I'm super excited to be here and in company of such great panelists. So thank you.
Dwana?
I struggled to just pick 3 or 4, but I am
Yeah.
Thank you for opening that. So I'm a Black woman, and I am a mom of 2 crazy, amazing little people, and I'm a technologist, and I'm also a Chicagoan. And so I think that those things strung together help create my path and my journey, as well as the fact of the lived experience, which I know that we're all getting ready to speak to, and help form our expertise on all the topics we're about to talk about. So thank you, Jamie.
Thank you. See, now we know a lot about Wini, Neal, and Dwana. And so that's definitely opened us up a little. Actually, let's start. I think how we'll do this is we definitely have some things that we talked about, which would be great fodder, just sort of seeds for the conversation. But Dwana, it would be great to hear from you first, and then this would be one time, it would be so helpful if we could go around again. Can you tell us a little bit, I guess if you were to describe what it is you do as the CEO of Reboot, let's say to your 90-year-old grandmother or to your 5-year-old, and then just something that you are working on right now or something really passionate that you want to just bring forward right at the front of this conversation for the group today.
Awesome. So I lead a coalition of amazing tech companies that have come together under the mission to double the number of Black, Latina, and Native American women graduating with computing degrees by 2020. So we've got our amazing corporate partners, and then we also have amazing grantee partners, and those are organizations that we support that are in alignment with that mission. So things that we're working on, we're always looking to make investments in programs that are going to lead to systemic change, recognizing that the target population I just mentioned are the most underrepresented in tech. And so how do we focus on a very specific portion of the pipeline so that when I eventually go back to the tech industry, that it is more diverse and it's more inclusive and more credible.
Awesome, thanks. And we can go back that way. Go ahead, Wini, I see your.
Sure. So, you know, at SquareTrade, we pride ourselves on protecting the everyday things that you buy in retail. So we are a protection plan company, an insurance company, if you will, and part of the Allstate insurance group. And, you know, I don't have a role or an official title around social impact or community affairs, but one of the things that I'm personally very passionate about is improving the ability for women to access leadership roles. And so I'm an executive sponsor for our Women's ERG and also a champion for our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at SquareTrade. And so it's something I'm very passionate about from my personal you know, lived experience, and something that I try to drive within SquareTrade as just an executive within the company.
Thank you. Neal?
Thanks. Yes, I run Tableau Foundation, and the best way to think about the way we work is in nonprofit language is we're data capacity builders. And what that means is we donate our product, training, and financial support, help nonprofits build their capacity to use data to advance their mission. And last year, about 11 months ago, we launched a $12 million racial justice data initiative. And it's something I'm really passionate about. It's co-led by a colleague of mine named Channing Nesbitt. And I'm excited to say that in the first 11 months of our 3-year, $12 million initiative, we've already invested $10 million. So I have a new problem to solve, which is getting more funding. But I'm super excited about the work and very happy to just share my thoughts about what we've learned over the last 11 months.
Thank you. I actually think it's so interesting, and I will say, not to get brownie points from Zeev Klein and Melichoa, but I've just met like the most incredible people through Social Innovation Summit. And what I love is the way that I think you all were drawn to this conversation and asked to share from your experiences, both personal and professional. You know, someone that's working across the industry and really going to make seismic shifts in the way that Dwana is doing. And I think, Wini, more leaders like you in companies where it might not be your day job, but you're just engaged in so many ways, I think is just really more of what we need to see. And Neal, we are definitely going to be asking you a lot about the insights that you're seeing even in early days with your hub project, but I think sort of just bringing the best of what your company does and applying that to a challenge that I think all of us care about a lot in terms of seeing be different, both for ourselves and then obviously for the people coming up behind us. So with that in mind, we've had probably each been involved in a lot of these kinds of conversation, I guess, over the past year in particular, but probably long before that. We've heard a lot of people make commitments and, give speeches, etc. But I'm really curious if you, from your sort of vantage point, what you feel like we're not talking about that we should be talking about, or something that might not be getting the attention that maybe it needs. So what's one thing that you feel like hasn't been covered when we think about just having more honest conversations about racial and social justice? And happy for anyone to kick off.
I'm happy to jump in. So one, I feel like probably the audience and people on this panel, we're the choir and the preachers. So I think that the participants in this panel, they are interested in learning more about what to do, and we've got amazing experts throughout the entire conference that are amazing in their individual spaces about how we move the needle forward. So for me, what I haven't seen and what I haven't heard and what I would love to see as conferences and organizations and discussions move forward is more results. So let's start talking about, we spent the last year making commitments and investments. What have those, and now what's the data saying? How have we moved that needle forward? How have these investments made an impact? How have the commitments changed? How are you living up to the commitments? I think that there's been enough over the last year and a half. We're all on board now. So what's that next phase? What's that next action? And then to tag on to what Neal says, let's root it in data. Let's make sure that we understand what the baselines are, so that we are speaking the same language with regards to what the numbers actually mean. And the numbers aren't going to lie; they're going to tell the real story. Is all this effort really making the impact and the change that we want to see?
I just wanted to quickly ask you before we go around, so you're talking about results. Does that mean you also are seeing a lack of progress, or is it more just that we're not talking enough about the results? We're talking more about sort of what we see as the challenge.
There's still lots to talk about the challenge, and still the talk about the challenge is still very necessary, because as much as I feel like we're the choir and this audience is the choir, we feel like we know some things that are happening. There's still many that don't, and so we still need to talk about the challenges and some of the solutions that are happening as we try to move forward. So I think in the 1-year anniversary of the death of George Floyd, there were lots of articles that came out about all the company commitments, and was there real change? Where are we in the past year? And most of the articles that I read didn't show that there was enough progress or any real tangible progress. So the question and challenge is, how are we making an impact? How are all of these open hearts and larger wallets and piggy banks, what systemic change has really happened? And let's talk about that, so that we can create the playbook for those that are really trying to move that needle forward. And there's no silver bullet, knowing that, but how do we create the playbook so that we can really lead the changes that we want to see?
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to be more provocative than Dwana. So we're talking about, we need, the accountability to, I guess the conversation is maybe something that we are not sort of pointing out as much, because I think all of us feel like this is not something that's going to happen overnight, but I think pointing out that we need to be focused on those outcomes in the ways that we're focused on other outcomes in our business, that we probably wouldn't let a year go by being like, what happened to that? So Wini, Neal, what else are we maybe is not getting enough attention or not talking about that you'd like to raise?
So maybe I'll jump in. And it's not that it isn't getting attention, as we talked about. There's a lot of talk, there's a lot of commitment, there's a lot of investment, right? But the thing that we don't talk as much about is building coalitions. We have talked about how do we invest in the Black community? How do we invest in the Latina community? How do we invest in women that are underrepresented in tech? We talk about a lot of different groups and commitments. We don't talk about how we can bring all of them together. I mean, this is a great summit, right? Social Innovation Summit is all about bringing all of us together. But we don't talk enough about how do we all collaborate on trying to drive that impact together. So I'd like to see a little bit more of the coalition building and the joint commitment from various initiatives, really, to make progress in the country and in society in general, right? We can start at the grassroots level, but at some point, unless all of these initiatives come together, we'll start making progress only in pockets, and that's not sufficient.
I know.
I think the thing. Go ahead. Sorry, Jake. Go ahead. Oh, okay. I think this is a great topic, and thank you, Dwana, for kicking it off. I think the thing I think about is, we talk about this whole process as being a journey, and people are on a journey and they're learning. I think we need to be more impatient, because I started in the tech industry in 1989. This conversation has been going on before that and throughout my entire career. And I think we know what needs to be done, and we just need to talk about how to get it done. You hear a lot of times when companies make these bold commitments and then they report back, they'll talk about how hard this work is and how challenging it is, and they're not making the progress they hope to make, and they need to work harder. That narrative's been floating around in the sector for 30 years. And I think we just need to say enough of that. And you're either committed or you're not, and let's just get some of this done. And it's okay to keep learning, but you don't need to keep relearning the same things over and over again to make progress.
Great. Well, I know we'll hear from Dwana about how people are coming together from a coalition standpoint. I think the work that you're doing, Neal, that I know we want to hear about as well, some practical ways to actually put something into motion and to take the conversations and actually apply it to truly understand what problems we're trying to solve and to be able to make some sense of that. And I definitely want to go back to Wini, just your point around I know we're going to talk a little bit about like intersectionality and the ways that, from a multiracial lens, what does that really mean? And if I were being more provocative about what Wini said, it might be, we're really not linking arms in the way that we could be. And there needs to be more understanding and more conversation around that, because I think, to your point, we're probably not bringing all the kind of firepower that we could. Where should we start? Just sort of diving in a little more, because I feel like each of you, there's so much I know you could say, but just in terms of those topics, the things that's on your mind that you feel like do need more conversation to lead to the kind of change that we're looking for. Accountability, progress, narrative that we've heard for too many years, or people sort of being almost too siloed in their thinking about how to approach this work. Happy for anyone of you guys to pick it up.
So I guess to understand your question, what else can we do to move past where we are? One of the baselines I think that I kind of already mentioned it for me is rooted in data. So organizations need to collect and disaggregate the data. The very baseline of that it needs to be disaggregated by race and gender. But if we're talking about inside of our companies, that we can go a step further and add job function and level. If we're talking about our nonprofit partners, that could be types of programs and ages. And so the point is to really take an intersectional lens and intersectional approach, recognizing that we as individuals can't necessarily lump everybody into groups. So as an example, women are not a monolith. Not all women are the same. Not even all Black women are the same. Not all Hispanic women are the same. Not all Asian women are the same. So how are you first understanding your baselines with regards to collecting and aggregating your data, and then being really intentional to design programs and initiatives or fund programs and initiatives that are going to both recruit and retain, enhance, and have a lens towards equity, inclusion, and be specific with regards to the groups that you actually want to target. So collect the data, be intentional, let's take an intersectional approach.
I think, Dwana, that's a really interesting point, right? Let's start with a baseline. Let's collect the data. Let's be very, very intentional. I'll give you an example. Just over the past year, SquareTrade's gone through the same journey that a lot of other companies have, which is where are we? What do we need to do? How can we be more intentional? And how can we drive some of that change, right? So our DEI initiatives, while we've always had a strong presence from an Allstate and Allstate Foundation perspective in the SquareTrade world of things, which was more tech focused, we didn't have a deliberate DE&I initiative. And a number of volunteers, actually employee volunteers, got together and started a DE&I initiative. And they started a panel that would help drive some of that change long before the company decided we were going to hire a DE&I head. And I think that's fundamentally sort of where it starts. It started with employees feeling like there needs to be change, executive sponsoring it and supporting it and championing it. And then looking at that data, right? So they did a survey of just our employee group and said, hey, where are we today? And where do we need to be? And what are we going to do very intentionally about getting there? So for example, just this past week, we hired for the first time 3 interns from HBCUs. This is the first time we've ever done that very intentionally, right? What are we doing? We hired a new DE&I head. And one of the things that we're doing is each of our employee resource groups are now coming together under the broader umbrella to really form external and internal outreach. So just because the women's group decided to host an event doesn't mean that other people are not supportive, right? Just because the Hispanic community and the employee resource group sponsored an event around Cinco de Mayo, for example, we brought together all of the other employee resource groups to say, hey, what can we do together? So again, this is just an example within the company, but there's so much that the coalitions and the groups that we represent can do at a much larger scale.
Wini, just sticking with that for a minute, because we've now just brought up intersectionality kind of again. When you think about the fight for equity across, various marginalized groups, whether it's at work or in society as a whole, I know that there was this idea that you had shared around minorities within the minority. So just wondering from your point of view, keeping sort of awareness and momentum going for equity overall, but recognizing the needs of people on different levels and how you account for those different experiences, but come together in the way that you would sort of shared that you'd want to see more of.
Yeah, I mean, Dwana brought it up, right? Let's look at women, right? Black women's lived experiences might be very different from a Hispanic woman's lived experience, might be very different from an Asian American's lived experience. Guess what? You and I are both Asian Americans, but your lived experience is going to be fundamentally very different from mine. The family or societal norms might have been different. We certainly have a lot of overlap and a lot of things in common, right? When we think about those lived experiences and what we need to do together to elevate those. At the same time, we have to recognize that everybody comes at the challenge from a different perspective. It's their lived experience that really drives that perspective, right? So when I think about minorities within minorities, we have to recognize as a community that an individual's lived experience, or even a subset of the community's lived experience, is going to be fundamentally different from somebody else's. So we don't want to lump together everybody who's Asian American, everybody who's Black, everybody who's Hispanic, because guess what? Their lived experiences drive as much of their future experiences and their career growth and their economic opportunity as just their belonging to a minority group. And so that's, I think, what we need to start acknowledging and recognizing, that it's that intersectionality between the group or identity that they have, as well as their own experiences, and making sure that we don't lump everybody together, right? Because the moment we start lumping everybody together, then we've lost the things that we celebrate about diversity and inclusion, which is that we are all fundamentally slightly different. But at the same time, we have a lot of things in common, and we can drive change together.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to take this in a little bit of a different direction, because I want to hear, I think on the one side, there is just like a humanity aspect that you're talking about. On the other side, and this already has been brought up, we're talking about data and how we can actually use it to sort of actually sort of put some of this in action in terms of not, making progress in our society on racial and social justice. So Neal, do you want to tell us a little bit about what's happening with your project at Tableau, what you've been learning with the Racial Equity Data Hub? I guess any insights that you're seeing, even if you're only a year in.
Yeah, thank you. I think what the topic that Dwana kicked off and that Wini was just talking about, the way we're coming at it is really trying to do two things: democratize access to data, and then invest in projects where, as Dwana pointed out, there are opportunities to improve the collection of disaggregated data, so we can get a finer tune on sort of what's going on in different communities around the US. So in February, we launched our Racial Equity Data Hub. And the goal there is to, collect and point to data sets that advocacy organizations can use to advocate for whatever's important in their community, and to simplify that process. So instead of having to go to like a open portal at your state government website and download these really complicated Excel spreadsheets and then figuring out what to do with them, we're trying to simplify that whole process. So you can download, if you use Tableau, you can download a Tableau visualization. If you don't use Tableau, you can download data that have been curated and cleaned, and you can use whatever tool that you like. Our partners at PolicyLink recently launched the Racial Equity Data Lab, which is a similar democratization effort, which they have the National Equity Atlas, which is an amazing set of data. The Data Lab is really allowing people to get access to those data in a structured format so that we can democratize access. And then maybe somebody who's not a data person, who doesn't know what an R value is or a trend line, can actually get the data, print out a fact sheet about the first fact sheet they have up there is around the $15 minimum wage. And they can create a fact sheet for their community and take it and use that as part of their argument and advocacy for a $15 minimum wage. So what we think is, we don't want to create solutions and sort of export them to the world. We want to sort of democratize access to data and enable communities to use data in the ways that they want to use data and for the issues that are important to them. And so I think, getting back to Dwana's point, a Black woman in New York might want to use data for one thing, whereas a Black woman in Detroit might want to use it for something else. So we shouldn't be exporting our opinion on what the data should be saying. We should just be making the data accessible and easy enough to use where people could use it for what's important in their community. And we think the real power lies in the local community anyway. And so the more we can do to empower those people, the better.
Thank you for giving also just a real life example of how it can be used, because at the community level, and looking at different demographics and pulling in all that information, like I think that could be very powerful. So thank you for sharing that. I'm seeing some questions come in, and I guess one thing I wanted to just bring up as a conversation point is what I think is being called out, the difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion and racial and social justice. One thing I wanted to say is, Social Innovation Summit brings together people of like all different sort of experiences and sectors. And many of us, happen to work in the, private sector in corporate. So we might be talking, we're sort of mixing some of the efforts that we're sort of seeing happen to make a difference in terms of like Dwana across tech. There's a real consequence to representation and not having enough of it and not getting there fast enough. And so that to me may be more on talking more broadly about the consequences for society on racial and social justice, whereas some of your tech company partners might be looking at it as how do we, what's our sort of internal composition and, wanting to make change there. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there something that you might want to share around that? Because I feel like you probably see it across industry in a particular way.
So there is a difference, obviously. So being able for a company, our corporate partners, to be able to understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion mean for their organization, and to be able to talk about it, measure it, enhance it, recruit, retain, et cetera. Those are internal efforts, and you can translate that to outside of corporate America with regards to diversity in spaces or inclusion in spaces or equity in spaces, because obviously all those terms have individual meaning. When we're talking about social justice and social impact, those terms are not necessarily new. I think maybe the attention around it over the last year may be new, but the terms definitely are not new. And so what does that mean with regards to how we're able to impact what's happening in our society and move that needle forward justly? Whether we're talking about racial injustice, whether we're talking about just insert in whatever form of thing an organization wants to act on. So I guess to answer your question, they're separate. It's more so how are we impacting, for in this instance, social justice or racial justice. And you can use philanthropy for that, and using social corporate responsibility for that to actually move the needle for social justice.
Dwana, do you want to spend a moment? I saw a question just around what are the consequences that you see and that's sort of driving your work at Reboot Representation, more broadly from a societal standpoint, and why you're on this mission?
So we are rooted and grounded in data. The reason why Reboot exists is because there was a survey and report. These 32 amazing tech companies were surveyed to find out what they were doing with their philanthropic dollars as it related to women and technology. And so those 32 companies represented 500 billion in revenue and 500 million in philanthropic giving. And they were only spending 5% of that funding on women and girls in tech, and less than 0.1% on Black, Latina, and Native American women and girls in tech. So we know that tech has an issue with regards to representation, and the media in 2017, 2018 was reporting that we're investing in it. Tech companies are doing a great job. And so the survey was, do the numbers match what is being reported in the media? And the answer obviously is no. And then to go a step further, the pipeline actually and really was shrinking. So when you look at the public data, again, I'm always going to go back to data, from the portion of the graduates from 2017, Black, Latina, Native American women represented 4% of the graduates in computing. And that number wasn't projected to double to 8% until the year 2052 without intervention. So Reboot exists so that we can move that needle forward so that companies can come together as a collective and actually make investments that are going to make systemic change. Going back to what Wini said earlier about seeing more coalitions, we are a coalition exactly for that. And with the very specific mission to boost the most underrepresented population in tech, which are Black, Latina, and Native American women, and knowing that rising tides raise all ships. So just because we're focusing on this segment of the population, the programs and the initiatives and the investments are going to help all women, and they're going to boost, hopefully, representation for all underrepresented people, even though our focus is very narrow. So okay, that's going back to being intentional and being strategic and being just having real actions match the words that the companies are living by. The other exciting thing about the coalition is that the small amounts that an organization would have given are now exponentially compounded to make a greater impact to organizations that are underfunded. And now they can do more to impact more women. And the goal is to increase this portion of the pipeline so that there will be more people in the tech space. So there's a lot of measures and needs that are happening right now, but again, being specific and intentional and knowing that no one company got us to this place of inequity by themselves. But we also have to know that no one company can fix it alone. So it's the power of the collective.
Absolutely. I'm seeing a few other questions. Some of them are, you know, I want to throw out there. I like to make things really spicy, so I'm going to do it. You know, we have someone that sort of asked about really wanting to talk a little bit more about intersectionality, how we can work to address unique needs of different groups. That's one thing. Another thing, which I think is, you know, talking about reparations and that being something for our country that is, you know, there are people actively been working on this for like the past 30 years, but I know somebody asked about that. So I don't know, I don't want to put anyone on the spot. We also want to talk a little bit about how do we, as you know, allies, all of us to a degree in different backgrounds, including everyone who's joined today, what we might share sort of as advice. So I know this is throwing a lot out there, but should we take the harder things first? I don't know if someone has a point of view. And the truth is that, you know, these are, you all represent your organizations, but you're also individuals. So I think feel free to speak even at a personal level. I think it's what, you know, this is what the people want to hear. So I'm conscious of trying to get to some of these.
Which question are you starting with, Jamie?
Let's start with thoughts about reparations and the role that, you know, that conversation and what it would mean, I guess, for kind of our experience here in the US. Anybody want to?
Neal, you're off mute. I didn't know if you wanted to start.
No, go ahead, please.
I'm looking for the specific question so that the audience knows. Jamie, if you have it handy, do you want to read it so that the audience knows what the question is?
Oh, you know what? I'm scrolling. I want to just say that we had, there was someone that was sort of planned to be a part of this conversation, and that might be why it's coming up. What's your take on reparation and the movement? Is that something you think our country needs to address?
I guess I'll take a stab at the question. It's conversation about race in this country has been very interesting, especially over the last, let's call it 2 years. And when we talk about reparations, that can mean different things to different people. Most recently, you may have seen in the news about the Tulsa massacre and what happened to that entire community and what that meant for generations of Black people, Black Americans to come. Where that community had economic wealth and had a community that was thriving, and that was ripped away from them. So it definitely takes one understanding our country's history and how we got to where we are today. And then the ultimate question is, what do we do about that? What do we do about something that's very public now? Using the Tulsa massacre as the example, something that's now public and people are gaining insights and knowledge about that. Can our country do something about that? Yes, there are things that can be repaid, and that I'm not the expert in what that looks like from a government standpoint or from what the city should be doing. But yes, I think that there's definitely things that can and should happen. We can talk about our Native American communities and everything that they've gone through, and what that looks like for those communities as well. So one, I think we definitely, everybody, we need to understand the history and not be scared of it. It's our American history. So whether we're talking about teaching it to the children in schools, which is another debate that we have today, it's kind of like my argument in Foundation on data. So how can we correct the future if we don't understand the past? So we should know it and then figure out, yes, how are we going to create equities for the Americans that are in this country?
Yeah, I would just say, I think for all of us, even in this conversation, I think I would just, being judgmental, think there should be an openness to understanding without sort of saying that this is, like, to the point of things that happened in the past, they have consequences to today, to today. And so if this is a topic of interest, which I have also been following, to really understand not only the history, but also what the consequences are and what we could do about it. And I think that is one thing that is on the table. If we want to sort of go back just in terms of the intersectionality, I see a few things questions wise. I just want to leave it open in terms of how, I guess, I asked you already a little, Wini, about that since it was brought up, but I know I see some questions just still around the.
Look, I don't have a silver bullet. Like, let's be honest about it, right? I think we're all trying to learn and we're all trying to engage and we're all trying to collaborate to figure out what we can do together. Reboot Representation is a great example of a coalition that has come together specifically because we've identified a problem. The data suggests that we actually do need to make rapid change, and that we need a collaboration amongst multiple parties, whether it's private companies like Reboot represents, or nonprofits, right? And other coalitions, public policy, universities. We have to have those coalitions. I'll give you an example of where some of the intersectionality can occur, right? There are a number of initiatives right now. 110's a coalition that Allstate is part of, and 110 started with the mission of creating 1 million jobs for African Americans and the Black community specifically, but through upskilling, right? So it's about creating the momentum for hiring and promoting in the future, but starting with upskilling the community and creating these jobs. And there are 35 other companies that are part of this coalition. Goldman Sachs started the 1 Million Black Women initiative, right? And so if you think about all of these groups, there's a lot of overlap and intersectionality in what they're trying to achieve through their philanthropic efforts, as well as through just the corporate social responsibility efforts. How can we bring them together? I mean, I think that's part of the dialogue that we need to have, which is there are things that are in common that different coalitions have identified as real problems that we need to drive change around. How can we, whether it's through the Social Innovation Summit or other forums, how can we bring these initiatives together so that we're marching towards that common goal? And as Dwana talked about, creating a multiplication or multiplicative factor around the philanthropic efforts and the impact that we can have. Because any one company doing it by themselves is not going to be successful. Any one organization doing it by themselves will make some localized change, but that's only part of the solution. So really the question becomes, how can we bring all these coalitions together, right? And create a common understanding of, we know we have a problem of underrepresentation of Black, Native American, and Latinas and in particular women in technology, in insurance, in retail, and a number of other industries. How do we drive that change? And that's how I think about it, which is we have a lot of coalitions. We're all part of some coalition, or we're trying to create real impact through our representation, our volunteer efforts, our engagement, our philanthropy. How do we bring those together? How do we start that dialogue of let's do it together so that we can have real lasting change in the communities that we represent?
Neal, do you have any thoughts just in terms of what you're learning and seeing from a data standpoint about how groups that are in these coalitions might effectively utilize some of what you're able to sort of analyze?
I think Dwana's talked about this quite a bit. And, you know, the data really, what we say a lot is we don't need data to tell us that there is a problem, right? We all know there's a problem. What we need the data to help us do is figure out what problems are where, how are they affecting communities, and then how do we actually come together to solve them? And oftentimes the racial justice discussions, they get so broad and conceptual that you walk away not really understanding what you, as somebody who works in this space, could actually do. So what we've actually seen are really great examples of, you know, nonprofit organizations using data to really tune the message that they're trying to portray down at the community level. So, for example, when we built the Racial Equity Data Hub, I was, and we're not quite there yet with it, but I was demanding sort of this scenario where if, you know, somebody is going to their school board meeting and they want to advocate for education equity, for some kind of policy, we need to enable that person, whether they're a data person or not, to go find information on their community at that low level community, that community level data, and be able to empower them to not just get the data, but to, you know, incorporate that into their overall argument for whatever they're championing. And I think that's the way we're going to make progress. When I think about the coalitions, what I like about Reboot Representation is, you know, they're intentionally focused on a very specific issue that's important, and they're bringing in together a whole bunch of companies to help advance that particular issue. And I think, as Wini pointed out, now what we need to do is, across all the different kinds of coalitions, is figure out how to weave those together so they support each other. And there is work going on that way because of the intersectionality. So, you know, we've all, the school to prison pipeline has existed for decades. We've known it's existed for decades. It robs people of color of, you know, education outcomes and career. And so that affects sort of the DE&I sort of goals of companies who are trying to, you know, hire more people of color. So all of these things really intersect in one way or another. And I think we don't know yet enough about how to actually work across coalitions to sort of make some of these things happen. And then I know we're running out of time. The last thing I think we just have to be careful of is not get so academic about our language. I think every time I do a panel presentation, somebody has to make a comment about something academic about sort of this issue. I just think we have to be really careful that we don't get so caught up in the language that we forget to make progress on the issues. And as a white male, you know, I'm uncomfortable in this conversation 90% of the time I'm talking about it. And that's okay. And I've just sort of chosen, I'm going to say what I have to say, and I'm going to take my beatings, and I'm going to learn from them and hopefully become smarter every day. But we really need to we need to be able to have honest conversations without getting academic about the exact language that we're using. Yeah.
I think that's a great point, and we appreciate leaning into discomfort, because that is a sign that we're getting somewhere, I think, all of us. I know we are running out of time. Love, just if we could go around and just, if we could leave the group from your point of view, crystal ball, tell us one thing that makes you optimistic about the future and the direction of all of this work around racial and social justice. Wini, you want to go first?
Sure. Look, the thing that makes me really optimistic is that we're all here and we're talking about it and we're engaged and we're actually trying to take action, right? So each one of us in our own world is trying to drive change. We have a long way to go. This is the beginning of the journey. And as Neal pointed out, this conversation has been happening for over 40 years. And it'll continue for the next 40 years. What it really matters is whether or not we're able to drive change and take collective action and see the impact. We started out with saying, let's look at the impact. Let's identify results that we want to see. That's what I'm really optimistic about. I think we now have the data and the momentum and the conversation and the engagement to be able to drive some real lasting impactful change.
Great, thank you. Dwana or Neal?
I'll jump in. I'm cautiously optimistic. And what gives me that encouragement and excitement, one, are partners that I have both on the coalition side, the corporate side, as well as our grantee partners, because they're the organizations that are they're putting their money where their mouth is with regards to moving that needle forward. And I'm going to go back to something you said at the beginning of the conversation, Jamie, with regards to the rules, and that was impact matters, not just intent. So be intentional.
Thank you. Neal?
I'm encouraged by two things. One is, when I hear amazing leaders like, Dwana and Wini talking about using data, I just think the problems we have to face are so massive, interconnected, and complicated that just the more we can understand them and how to approach them in new ways, I think data is a language to help do that. I'm also just encouraged by the young people. I think the young people, this topic is something that, all of us who have kids, you realize kids aren't racist when they're born. And I'm encouraged just by the energy and passion that I'm seeing in young people for helping kind of move this needle on this really important issue.
Thank you. Thank you all. I know that we went a little over and people are hopping into other panels and sessions, but they stayed with us because it was so wonderful to hear your perspectives. I think continuing to show up and lean into discomfort and focus on what the goal is really the way that we'll, continue actually making the progress. And I'm just so appreciative of your candor and willingness to jump into this conversation. It's not always easy to have it in various forums out loud, but thank you so much for your thoughts and your wisdom and your work.
Thank you.
Conversation. Bye.
Have a good one.
Bye.